I am Matt Zinman, author of Z-isms and founder of the Internship Institute. Today, we're going to talk about a little Z-isms and life skills, but mainly how to make internships matter for your company. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Is an internship strategy the answer? Maybe it is. Google says that they accept about 1,500 interns out of 40,000 applicants every year in the United States. Earning a spot at Google is very competitive. Generally speaking, you don't have to pay interns, or at least not at full price, or full rate rather, but are they worth it? Is it more trouble than it's worth? Or could it be actually the leverage you need in your business? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm Dov Baron, I am your host, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that transforms everything by turning meaning into action. To find out more about me, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. And by the way, this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about neuroscientists, astronauts, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning entertainers, and some folks you might think you would automatically disagree with that you will find truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com, that's DOVBARON.com, and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into a delicious episode of Curiosity Bites. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get over to whether you go to Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you tune into podcasts, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. We would love you to do that because you can listen to either show there. And if you are a regular listener, big thank you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are honored to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also catch us on Google Home and Alexa. Just say, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Have you considered the value of creating an internship program for your organization? An internship is, in case you're not sure, is a short-term work experience. It's offered by companies and other organizations to people, sometimes the students, often they're not. This gives that student or that individual the opportunity to be in the environment, to get a sort of work experience going on. But having interns, is that a disaster waiting to happen? Or could it be the key to your business growth, no matter how big or how small you are? See, here's what I wonder. I wonder what myths you are carrying about having an intern program inside of your organization. Well, let's find out together, because that's exactly where we're going. Our guest today is Matthew Zinman. He is the founder of the Internship Institute to make experience matter. He is also the author of Z-isms, and he's the host of the Insights to Live By podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Matthew Zinman!
Hey, Dad, it's great to be with you. Wow, a nice introduction. Thanks so much.
Always good to have you here. We like to all start in the same place. In this sort of age of influencers and all those people who are so apparently famous and into having influence on us, who is somebody who we might not know, may not even consider, who's had a major influence on your leadership?
Uh, I would say that there are a number of authors. Probably Malcolm Gladwell. I'm going to go with has
Yeah.
been very influential for me.
How has Gladwell impacted you?
Some of the earlier books, The Tipping Point. My first career was in marketing. Then Blink, I'd say, had a major effect for me. In particular, about trusting my gut and all the things, if you're familiar with it around, of course you are, around thin slicing and all that goes into that, and not getting caught up in analysis paralysis, and then onward into outliers, for example, in my entrepreneurial pursuits and what it takes to succeed.
So, if you were sitting with a leader right now, another leader in any industry, and you're saying, when I look at what I've gained from these people, particularly Gladwell, and you said, okay, but here's the one thing I would want you to get, and maybe you could use in your leadership, what would it be?
I would go back to trusting your gut. I do think that leaders have a tendency to overthink things. I think it's so much more important now, more than ever,
Yeah,
to step up and be out front with the adjustments everyone's had to go through, and trusting your gut is certainly a key part of that.
yeah, I agree. Absolutely. It's very important. It's a keen balance between the two. But we live in a world where we've everything seems polarized, and what I mean by that is that there's the gut, and it becomes like, well, I just think it's true, so therefore it's true, which is kind of stupid and doesn't really help. And then there's the other side, which is the analysis paralysis, which takes the humanity out of things, and
Right.
it is that you're right, absolutely right. It's that keen balance between the two. So thank you for that.
Of
Now,
course.
we were talking about in the introduction, I talked about internships, and you started the Internship Institute. That, for me, I mean, even in our original conversation, was like, that's a weird thing to start.
Well,
What was the reason you started it?
well, like anything else, weird to who?
Was that?
Weird to who? You know,
It
so
was just okay. Yeah, absolutely. Weird to
yeah,
who.
right.
Fair
Well,
enough.
the funny thing is, I mean, look, there's no substitute for experience. And the same thing goes specific to internships in every way. For me personally, I had four that were very influential in my career going back over 30 years at this point. And I'd always been very involved with internships, running them for my companies, my employers, and then since my own company since 2002. And there's always been a major void that I've noticed in terms of there being gaps between the schools and the employers and the students, and making it all work, and the mechanics of the programs themselves. The schools are not really set up. In There's a lot of you would thinks, right,
Mhm.
in this area. And so when I decided to do something in my entrepreneurial shift around 2005, this is what seemed to align for me in terms of my experience and passion and skills, and what I saw to be a market need.
So you were working you'd been an intern, you'd
Right,
worked in companies where they needed interns, you'd help to set those up, you'd set up
right,
uh those inside of organizations.
right.
But walk us through some of the, you and I talked about this last time.
Sure.
Walk us through some of the myths that people have about internship, because I think people do have myths about them that they cling on to.
Oh, for sure. Uh, well, for one, again, back to that experience, I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300 interns that I've had the opportunity to manage and mentor through my career. Have several now, as you might expect. And I think that's really where the first myth starts, is that internships happen one-on-one, right? Ultimately, this is going to come back to that individual supervisor working with however many interns, their level of commitment, and their ability to do it right. And when they do it right, everybody wins. And
Mhm.
so the first misconception is feeling as though you don't have the time to do it, even though, quote unquote, oh, interns in some cases, as you mentioned, oh, they're free, but they're not free because I have to put my time into it.
Exactly.
That's completely wrong. And I'll explain why. because, for example, we did a study out of a major grant that we did that a single supervisor can gain over 200 days of productivity by managing and mentoring interns in the right way. And if you think about it, for my purposes, you want to manage more than one intern. And
Mhm.
there's our thresholds here. So it might be up to
Sure.
60 hours of projects a week. So in the summer, it might be 2 at 30 hours, or I'll go up to 4 at 15 hours. So that's 60 hours of productivity that might only take you 5 hours, 10 hours, not 10 hours. Okay. So if you're doing it right and you're doing your project planning and you're delegating, you're not only going to get that much gain. It's about 6 hours to every 1 hour.
Mhm.
And of course, they're going to bring expertise and skills that you don't have. So social media and their ability to come up to speed on new apps and programs and things, that they're just very, very good at that. So I think it's really about, finding your groove, whoever you are, and making sure that you understand uh, that it's worth your time to trade that productivity for what it is you'll have interns do instead.
So, okay, so the number one myth right out of the gate there is,
Right.
if I have an intern, I got to spend all this time training them. Yeah, okay, there may be, pennies on the dollar or whatever it is, but I still got to put in all that time and I don't have the time and I'm already swamped. And what you're saying is that the value exchange of that time versus what they can produce
Right.
is far outweighed. But
Far.
yeah, but the first thing that comes up for me in this
Right.
is the I'm trying to remember his name now, the Kramer example. You're fired, you can't fire me, I'm a volunteer.
Right.
Sometimes you have people, what happens in the internship if you've just got somebody who is just don't seem to be getting it. And,
Right.
and it feels like you're putting in a lot of time, and you feel bad because you can't fire them because you don't really paying them. And so how's that work?
Well, that's a sound question. Let me, we're ground level here. So I want to
Yeah.
put things into context just a little bit, especially for larger organizations, but any organization. There is no internship program that's going to succeed without the complete buy-in of the CEO.
Right.
It's a cultural part of, folding it into and embedding it as part of the organization. No you know department or individual wants to feel like this is being rammed down their throat.
Right.
And so that's part one. Next is, again, especially a larger organization, someone has to own the ball. Someone's running that program. Typically that's going to be an HR person,
Right.
and they're filling requisitions, as it were, for however many department heads and supervisors. You have to have dedicated supervisors. Now, to the point that where we were to your question, if you are, this is really the key in terms of reverse engineering the program. If you are that individual who is not sure whether or not to have interns and whether it's worth your time, you're not recruiting and having them arrive trying to figure out what to have them do. You are figuring out what to have them do so that you know that project inventory and define need, so that you know who to recruit to have them do it. And even more so is if you're going to put the effort into it, it is a lot more productive and better from a work quality standpoint to have multiple interns,
Mm.
at least two. And the reason, Dav, is because if I have research or writing or something, social media, all kinds of different projects, not every intern is going to be great at every one of those kinds of things. So having multiple interns not only enables me to delegate those projects to the right individual who's best suited to do it, but that customizes the experience for them as well, because that's what they want to do and that's what they're best at. So that's really where you start getting that productivity multiplier. Does that answer your
Well,
question?
yeah, but we're still at the same thing, which is, so let's take it out of interns
Sure.
for a minute. Let's just put it into employees. you interview somebody, they've got a great resume,
Right.
they come across well in the interview, and you hire them, and then they're crap,
Right.
right?
That's
It's
fair.
much easier to fire somebody who's crap
You know,
because
the
I'm paying you money, but the intern can show up and look like all the bits are there, and then suddenly,
right.
is it? What I'm saying
Sure.
is it difficult to deal with that, particularly at a large level?
I understand. In fact, I did not answer your question. So let me do that now, which is to say, look, I mean, I've fired interns.
Yeah,
It's not something that I ever care to do, and it's
no,
not something that happens right away. You certainly want to bring them along and try and
sure,
find, what is their strength if they're not performing well and the things that you're giving them. But sometimes it's not right for them either.
no, exactly.
I had an intern who just this term who I started working with and told them I thought that they needed to be doing other things, and so in that more realistic example, it was because they're graduating. It's because rather than spending time with me and maybe not being able to, that value exchange wasn't really quite there for me. There are other things that they need to be doing for their benefit in order to land on their feet when they graduate, be those informational interviews or relying on their career center. So it was really meant to be, helping them land on their feet more than it was, you're not doing a great job for me. So
Right.
I think there are different ways that it makes sense to let somebody go, but to do it in such a way that it's to their benefit as well.
Well, I think that letting anybody go, it's not about beating anybody up. I mean, I think if you're a decent human being, you want to let people go, um, because you can see that they're not in their best place, not because they're not serving you that well, although that might be very true, but they're probably not serving you because they're not in the right place. And if they were in the right place, they'd serve immensely well. And sometimes I think we've all got to take accountability and responsibility for the fact that sometimes it's that we've put them in the wrong place. It's not even that they
Right.
applied for the wrong place. We just put them in the wrong place. And they're like, I may appear to be this personality, but I'm actually not that, and sometimes that needs to, that's what I'm saying about it's not just about the training, but the filtering to really get clear on who actually is this person and where are they really best suited. That I think is really interesting. So
Well,
if a company,
Dov,
XY,
may I retort on
please,
one
yes,
thing you said?
please.
I mean, look, it also comes back to the strategy behind the internship program, right? A
Right.
larger company typically is going to have an internship by and large as a pipeline strategy. And
Yes,
that's the whole point of it, is the try before you buy per se,
exactly.
and test drive. So the the fact that some of them are not going to perform well is just part of that strategy
Yeah.
in terms of the vetting process. And look, I mean, I've had interns that looked like rock stars that came in and crashed and burned, and I've had ones that were mousy that you take a chance on and ended up being rock stars. And I think that's really with anybody in this case. And certainly, again, back to the earlier point, if you're a smaller company, and certainly on an individual basis, it's about productivity, right?
Yes.
In terms of what we're talking about. So if you're not getting that productivity in and into itself, especially if you're a smaller company, even a solopreneur, especially, that's when you have to make those decisions. So I just want to make sure I gave you a complete answer there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So if somebody has a or they're part of a larger company, how do they go about it? Like, do they go through through the Intern Institute, or how do they go about setting up an intern program inside of their organization that's not
Sure.
chaotic? Because on the surface of it, it could look like it could get pretty chaotic pretty quick. All these people running around, don't know who the hell they are. What do they do? Who knows? You know.
I think for any company of any size, it really just comes back to scale.
Right.
So if you are a larger company, and again, there are a lot of, you would think there are many large companies that have never had a formal internship program
Absolutely.
to do it right. And that's where they, in a way, hurt the culture because they're not being done right, and it's harder to take a risk. So in order to keep it manageable, I would go to a certain department head and let it spread.
Right.
Started as a pilot program, in marketing or finance or human resources, even for that matter, and let it take hold, let it take root. The supervisors have to get good at working with the interns, the same as the HR person needs to, the same as for the CEO now working backwards to reinforce it being a part of the company culture. And one other thing I didn't mention, especially in a larger company, which is essential, is to have a mentoring program also embedded into the internship, because especially with the executives who may not be in the day-to-day role of working with the interns at the ground level, part of their buy-in is in terms of that culture is to experience it from a mentoring standpoint, so that they're touching the program and they can continue to support it in that way. So I think for any company, it really is deciding about what that scale is. And I've had large companies that started with 2 interns and now have 50, 60 a year,
Mm,
and so on and so forth. It's like an annuity.
yeah.
And then back to the other part of your question, we're happy to help any company as the Internship Institute set up internships. That's what we do, not necessarily apprenticeships, not so much in the trades, but our focus is on the mechanics of really installing an internship program. We're not necessarily set up to recruit, although we can certainly help figure out how to help a company do that. But and again, the schools aren't necessarily set up to do it, but we also teach the companies, quote unquote, how to fish. And one of the things that are part of best practice recruitment is that you engage your existing interns to recruit for you. So
Mm,
if you recruit once and you do it well, then incentivize, and monetary is always a good way to go with students. I'm sure that companies are used to doing that with full-time employees, to go, and they know who their classmates are, they know what professors to talk to, and part of their role in an active internship program is to find their replacement, and then make sure the transition of those projects has continuity, which speaks to another aspect of those myths. I don't want to bring an intern on, have them leave, and have the benefit of them being here go with them. There are again ways to bridge those gaps. So those are, I think, some of the
well,
nuances
that was one of
to
the
your
things I was going
question.
to ask you about. So you bring
Yeah,
it, you bring an intern on,
right.
you spend time training them. They are productive, they are helpful, and then they bugger off, and you're like, oh God, I got to start again. So what's the process with that? Because again, I think this is one of the things that puts people off the whole idea. I think it's one of the things that puts people off the idea of employing people, is like, oh God. So what's the idea of that? How do we help with that?
Well, in part, the continuity has a little bit less to do with the interns as it does the projects. The work is all, it's there. So, I also recommend, quite frankly, that companies come in and look to have interns, if possible, stay with them for at least 6 months, even up to a year. I have an intern now who's been with me for over a year, and hope that continues for another, if possible, because she's that good. So, as long as you're making it an enriching experience and keeping them on a learning curve that's worth their while to stay with you, challenging them is also part of that give back, aside from compensation. So I'll have interns that are being recruited for the next semester come in and do some initial projects. This comes back to your point about bringing an intern on and having things not go right, where they're doing test projects as part of my decision whether to recruit them. Right, that's just a typical thing that any company can do, and part of those test projects are going to be the ones that have to do with an intern that's leaving, so that that other intern is coming up to speed. And again,
Right.
this all comes back to that certain way of doing it right.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I think the key, one of the key pieces that I think that larger companies haven't realized about it is the pipeline process. Is that instead of paying some agency to go out and you have to pay them several times the salary of that individual to bring them in, and
Right.
then maybe they'll work, maybe they won't. Whereas an internship, you actually get to see somebody who is potentially hungry enjoying, fascinated with the subject matter, who is wanting to learn. And then you can say, well, yeah, this person's really not a fit. They're not really into that, and they thought they were, but this is a great way for both of us to find out. Or they're really into it, and oh my goodness, this is a great fit. So it's a
Right.
great solution to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the other part of the equation. So if you do have a pipeline strategy and you've got an intern who's up to speed, it's a lot better to bring somebody who's intern with you as a full-time employee, because they have, obviously the investment that you've made in them, and the equity of it. The research is clear for so many years now that the cost per hire is easily reduced by having an intern program around a
Absolutely.
pipeline strategy, as well as retention and loyalty goes with that. It's certainly well established that interns, by and large, will stay with a company longer than someone who came in as a cold hire.
You also said something earlier, which I think is, we kind of skipped over, but I want to come back to it because I think it's important, which I think that a lot of organizations miss. And that is that your intern may not be getting paid at full rate, or even at all. But one of the things that's key about for the intern is that they are there to learn. And if you've got your intern running for coffee and that's all you've got them doing, you're not going to have a great intern. So talk to us about that need for them to learn, because this is one of the things is that I've said this to, I'll just tell you something I've told students in the past, and you, please, if you think I'm wrong, you can tell me. But I've said to people, I said, one of the things you want to do is you want to go to university, you want to get a big loan, and then you're going to come out after 4 years having a huge student debt, minimum 4 years, huge student debt. Sure, you would have partied your ass off and you would have met some really cool folks, and that's great. But you've had to you've had to live somewhere, and you've not been living at home, and all those things cost a lot of money. And at the end of it, we know the largest portion of people do not go into that thing they studied. So right there, there's a huge loss. And what I've said is, if you think there's something you're really interested in, it's better to take a portion of that money that you would have spent on an education and say, okay, I can live in San Antonio. I'm making up a town, right? I can live in San Antonio. I can work with this company as an intern at a fraction of income. I can use part of my education money, and I can actually get an experience to find out, I hate this stuff. Why am I even here? Or, wow, this is fantastic. Or, wow, this is good, but it's actually this. Now I'm inside. I can see there's actually that area that I really want to be in. And it seems like for me, at the other side of that equation is for the intern / student, is that's a much better investment for you to find out, am I even swimming in the right pool?
Right. That's incredibly insightful of you, honestly, Dav. And it's certainly a pet peeve of mine, because there is a hidden economic epidemic around graduates coming out of school with decades of debt, and a large percentage of whom they never go into the field for which they studied. And that isn't even necessarily a function of whether they interned, as much as there's a huge gap in that pipeline. That's part of the systemic mission of the Institute from the nonprofit side. It's not just about installing programs, it's about solving, some of those big issues. And I've given that quite a
Well,
a lot of thought.
I don't know about you, Matt, but I know that at 18, I was an idiot.
I was too.
Pretty much it. I was an idiot. And so when somebody says, what do you want to do? And you're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, you go, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? And somebody says, well, you're good at math. Have you tried coding? Okay. And you go to university and you do something, you're like, I hate this. Because one of the things is that just because you're good at something doesn't mean you should do it.
Fair enough.
That's another thing. Like, there are a lot of people who are good at stuff that they're like miserable as hell at.
I mean, I've seen it time and time again. I mean, a friend of ours, their son went all the way, scholarship and engineering degree, and then found themselves sitting in a cubicle. And we're like, what am I doing? even just not even just from the career, but from the experience. And of course, for the individual student, it is a lot about try before you buy. But there's a lot more to unpack here, quite honestly, around the fact that, if we're going to go Generation Z, for example, and of course you
Sure.
get blanket statements when you go there, is that they're conditioned to test, all the way K through 12. The students are aligned with the performance of the schools being taught to test well. And so no one really ever tells a student when they come from K through 12 into college about switching gears, in the fact
No.
that of course, GPA is important. Yes, you're going to party or whatever it is that you're going to do, but it's a lot, experience clearly matters a lot more than what happens in the classroom. I'm certainly
Yep.
biased about that, but for all the things that you spoke to, that is, of course, a lot of the purpose of the internships. But the problem ultimately is that as college students, they won't do what they don't have to do. They're conditioned to do what they need to do for their classes, and above and beyond that, whether it's to go and out of their way to do extra internships, or be that go-getter, as it were, or even just take courses that have to do with work skills that they were never taught in high school or college. And without, in the absence of an internship, they're coming into the workforce with the supervisor wondering why they can't write a cohesive sentence and can't think critically. So there are so many gaps here. I'm not sure your show is long enough.
Just to show them the gaps, right?
Yeah, I hear myself on the soapbox and I'm like, okay, all right, bring it down, bring it down. There's just so much there.
Yeah, but I think that this is why, I think it's why we have to look at both sides of this. The potential of a company taking on interns and what that means, but also the potential of the intern, and why why the value and benefits of it for them, because we might have the mindset of, why would I work for free, right? But
Right.
if you're working for free versus working for debt, and when you go to university, oftentimes you're working for debt, whereas working for free, you're getting an experience which you can quickly go, this sucks, I'm out,
Right.
as opposed to, well, I'm here for 4 years.
We've danced around it a little bit. I'm happy to talk about the compensation, because to pay or not to pay is certainly a huge question, and what is often affiliated with internships, free labor and what have
Good.
you.
Okay, let's talk about that.
And well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at it from a legal standpoint, and the law has changed in recent years, there was something on the books that goes back to 1937. But the general aspect of it is that if you are a company and you do not pay interns, then the yardstick is that the intern has to get more out of the experience than you get out of their labor.
Right.
That's generally speaking. Now, are the Department of Labor Police going to knock on your door and, take surveys? No, but there's a lot more to it. So in another way, if you have a pipeline strategy, and certainly the Googles, all the companies know this, you're going to pay, because talent is, at a premium.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay the student, then the better students are smart enough to go and get paid internships. They need to get paid, so they will. So you're already cutting yourself off. Now, I actually wrote a policy brief for Delaware Department of Labor around this, which is around the fact that if you're a company and you simply don't have the wherewithal to pay your nonprofit, you're a small entrepreneurial organization, it's worth it to you. All the more reason to get that productivity and do it right, and to have that give back. That's certainly how I run my business, and I pay my
Mhm.
interns along the way as I can, out of grants and what have you, and reward. But if you're a company that has the wherewithal to pay, you should pay. Yeah,
Right.
and credit is not an equal exchange. They're paying the colleges for those credits, which is a whole other soapbox. I don't think we have
Mhm.
time to go, although I'd be happy to in that way. So I'm certainly an advocate of paying the interns, as sure they are for themselves. There are other ways to compensate interns, of course, too. You could start out and do uh, performance-based compensation in different, depending on the company you are. There's too many dynamics to that
Yeah, of course.
to give any one example, but you can get creative. And certainly, again, if you're not paying or if you're paying, just show appreciation. Just remember how impressionable. It's easy. We're a little bit more experienced in our careers. It's easy to forget what it's like to be them and how
Hmm.
much your words carry weight. So this is, of course, somewhat supervisor 101, but all the more important in terms of how impressionable they are and how much that matters to fuel their motivation along the way.
So let's imagine for a moment that we're a mid to upper size organization. We go, okay,
Sure.
we'd like to start an internship program. Where do we start? Because there's probably people listening right now going, this, okay, there's some work to be done in this, but this could be very beneficial for us, create a great pipeline. And I, as this manager, VP, C suite individual, have kids of my own who are going to college, and I can see the stress of all that. I'd like to be able to help with that. Where do we begin?
Sure. Well, my initial answer is, there's no one answer to a certain degree, depending on the
Okay.
motivation. Reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer it depending on what that company is. But I'll give you a few different examples of the answer. Certainly, there are any number of schools that do it right. There are internships and there is something called co-ops. And without digressing too much, the co-op schools are set up to place these students. They're so well established. They have huge staffs. They run like a well-oiled machine. They're few and far between, quite honestly,
Mm,
because co-ops are hard to get into place for the very, it takes decades, quite honestly, to get that, your alumni supporting that and
yeah.
so forth. I typically recommend that a business, mid to large, and let's just talk about one location, is dealing with one university, not multiple universities, and to pick
Okay.
carefully which ones naturally align well with the kind of work that you're looking to have them do. But especially if you're now doing it a lot more virtual internships, it helps to have the structure, the dynamic be where the students know each other, or at least at the same school, and they're accessible to one another so they can team up on projects or things like that. And from a management administrative standpoint, it's a lot easier than to deal with multiple schools. So I think the first thing to do is to reach out to a few colleges and see how well set up the career centers are. There are, again, a lot of you would thinks in this case, and no two schools do anything the same way. So that's part of the dynamic and why it's so variable.
So there's the elephant in the room at this moment, obviously, to speak about is the fact that, we have gone through COVID, not gone through and out the other side, but traveling through the pandemic, which meant that pretty much everything became remote to a great degree. How has that changed the world of interns or internship?
I think it's changed it more from the employer side naturally than it has for the students. My program since 2002 has been virtual the entire time.
Right.
And I frankly prefer virtual internships from the pandemic aside. And I'll certainly come back to make sure I cover that aspect of your question. And the reason is because it's a lot easier for the students, especially during the academic term. And
Yeah.
it goes back to that continuity. They may not be able to travel or come off campus or come to a site, and they don't have to. And we all certainly beyond learned that we can be very productive remotely. And
Yeah.
for them, it's no different than taking a class, except it's real work, in terms of what their experience is, and in the company setting it up. And look, the company, so many companies are still, even at this point, going through the adjustment of the pendulum swinging on the
Yeah.
virtual side. And internships, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, have landed on the side burner. And I'm hoping, Dov, thank you so much for having me on, that this is the kind of conversation that's going to help employers realize what they're missing, because it is a huge blind spot. And again, those who just don't know the difference, miss out on these opportunities, and hopefully are taking away from this conversation that there is a huge win-win here for them to pursue. But again, someone's got to own that ball, and the CEO, I'll just reinforce, has to be completely on board. And I think, again, the students are used to it, and I think it's more the companies that have to get a little bit more of this structure in place, the same as they would manage their employees remotely. Of course, the interns, function in the same way.
Now, what was the year you set up the institute?
I started in the internship space in 05, and the institute I established in 07.
Right, so that's a good period of time. And I've always said that I think that the best niche people are the people who have the broadest knowledge. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you got to get niche about what it is you're doing, but you usually come from a wide variety background, and which opens up another niche, and you usually can move and pivot. Your journey has been an interesting journey. Walk us through a little bit of your journey and where you are today, so
Sure.
that we can sort of have a sense of that. Because, there's always, you go from point A to point B. Yeah, not really. You
Yeah,
go from
there's
point A to point C, from C back to A, from A to M. But it's kind of like it's a wiggly line. So walk us a little bit
right.
through yours.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll keep it top line, because it would be easy to go down some rabbit holes there, and feel free to ask me, anything that strikes you. I go back to 2002 when I started my own company in my first career, which was in marketing communication, and I had my own agency for several years. And at that point, oddly enough, to hear, virtual was unusual. And so
Of
remember,
course.
of course, the whole bricks and mortar versus the virtual, that was
Yeah.
that time period.
Back in those days, it was something called location, location,
Right,
location.
right.
Now, if you want to know what location stands for, it means Zoom
Yes, that's true.
or
Um,
GoToMeeting or one of those things.
it was completely opposite then. And
Yeah,
so a
exactly.
virtual company had it more, was more of a challenge. And for me, part of it was, on a personal note, if I may, I became a single dad at that point. These things intertwine. I needed the freedom, and it was very compartmentalized for me that, I was 50% when my son's with me. My son, I'm with him, and the rest of the time I'm running a company. But that kind of a business is run by the hour. So
Sure.
for the most part,
Yeah.
some retainers, but a lot of hourly work, and there's only so many hours in the day, and very difficult to get ahead. So that was the impetus for me to look to move into something. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there was just this need that I saw, and the challenge that I didn't realize was how much of a frontier, quite honestly, this entire space was, and is really remains to this day. It honestly, Dov, it's probably the hardest thing I could have possibly tried, imagine trying to pursue. And of course, I'm sure you can sense there's no loss of passion there, but it's the truth, and it's one of the reasons why, when I developed all my IP, I couldn't get it evaluated because there was no precedent. And so
No.
you're talking about workforce development, economic development, military transition, disadvantaged youth. That's where the grants came in. That's where the nonprofit switch happened in '07. I got almost a $400,000 federal grant that anchored me at that time. It sounds like a lot, but it only goes so far. And
No.
of course, over the years, there is some ebb and flow. And for any nonprofit, you have to run it as a for-profit and achieve that sustainability. And that is certainly not an easy thing to do in this space. And part of what's happened for me is that I've continued to diversify my entrepreneurial pursuits. My wife and I have another. I'm remarried now for several years to the love of my life. We have another business, which is something that we don't need to necessarily delve into, as well as that I, as you mentioned, wrote the book Z-isms. And going back at this point about 2 years, I hit a bit of inflection point. I was between grants, and my son Jake at that point is going off to college. So
Right.
my parenting hours were severely cut down, and it really was that opportunity to say, well, what would I regret not doing? We're in a stable position here. I've got a little bit of time and space for the first time in a long time. And of course, that's for anybody just the same. The book came to the surface for me. I had not planned to do more than write the book in terms of I want to, I'm not a bit, a coach in the sense of, here's my, credibility type book. It's something I felt very strongly about sharing and writing and then just going back and getting my next grant and, doing all the different
Yeah.
things that I do. COVID, however, has certainly had a major impact, as also already described. That has, to a certain degree, sidelined the nonprofit. I'm still doing any
Yep.
number of things and trainings and things, but I've begun to lean in, more than begun to lean it at this point, where I did start the podcast in your introduction, Insights to Live By, now in my 40 something episode, which is like a blink. And more recently, I've leaned all in. I've just developed some courses, a mini course and a full course, really in the areas of your expertise around mindset reset, and then the life upgrade course is a 29-day, everything I could possibly think of and have you do to make your life better. And those are all launching right now. So
Is
I
that all
just
based
yeah.
on the content of Z-isms?
Yeah, it actually
Right.
is. Uh,
So
Around
what
areas.
spawned that?
Go ahead,
What
please.
spawned that book? I mean, you talked about that gap
Right.
economically and the lack between the grants, but what spawned the creation of it?
There have been a number of concepts that I've lived by, some guiding principles that I've learned through experience. Just to mention a few, being earned confidence, being aware of spiders, inevitability. And so working backwards, mood health would be another one. So, for example, on a personal note, in writing the book, it's written as if it's a personal conversation with the reader. So I'm certainly putting myself out there with some
Good.
disclosures that I frankly had been very private. One of which is that I've had to contend with depression since my early teens, which I definitely now consider something I've defeated and managed entirely. But certainly that those experiences, though being no substitute for, I can share what I've come to learn to help others. And so there's a chapter on mood health. Earned confidence, in brief, it really speaks to the fact that we've all been through everything that we have in our lives.
Hmm.
And, here we are, right? We're still standing.
Yeah.
We're able to prove to ourselves that we know that we can handle everything in real time. So that eliminates things like worry and anxiety and making assumptions and anything that's based on uncertainties. Now that came about as a fact of my mom in my late 20s. I had a terminal illness, unfortunately. It's coming up on 25 years this month since she's gone. But that whole experience, toward the end of going through the difficulties of, is she going to make it or not, and then she did, you'd go through that anguish, and you had to get to the point where it was like, I just have to deal with the real. What will be will be. And that really was at the foundation of earned confidence that has served me well. um, Being aware of spiders is talks about manipulators, and the
Mm.
fact that really there are only two kinds of people in the world, in my view. And this is a Gladwell principle, right? This is a thin slice, that
Hmm.
you are either a spider or you are someone who gets caught in webs. And the point being that a manipulator, that's a conscious decision that someone makes, that they put an effort into pulling someone else's strings to bend to their will, to whatever end that may be. It could be a politically charged office environment, but and so forth. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. They might not do that to their family members or what have you. But
No.
if you have that capacity, you have that capacity. The rest of us are just, want to be oblivious. We want to trust everybody and believe in everybody until we have our suspicions. So it's very important to recognize that inevitability is actually a little bit of a longer topic. So I'm just going to put it there that it's a lot around self-belief from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and that you're working backwards from a point B of a vision of what it is that you're seeking to achieve, to the point where it's so crystal clear that you have that self-belief in it being inevitable. of happening, that has already happened now, and you just have to unfold it from that vision to the present. So that gives you the idea of it being just a little heady.
So there's some interesting things you brought up there, Matt,
Sure.
and one of them is, as you went through those things, I'm thinking, So I started thinking about it at one level, and I started thinking about the other. And the first was like, oh yeah, well, this would probably be a very valuable book for entrepreneurs. But I'm also thinking this would be a very valuable book for interns,
Yes, I would
because it
love
seems
for
to
it to
me
be.
that internship is going into something new, and
Right.
entrepreneurs are always going into something new. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like valuable for both of those groups. The lessons applied to the entrepreneur, the same lessons applied to the intern, would be equally valuable depending on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can tell, Dom. I really put everything into this, right? And you know, a lot of it's life skills, and also to the point we made earlier. These are things that the students are just never taught,
Yeah.
or that they're open to, right? I mean, look, I have teenagers. Try and get them to listen to you about life advice, right? And then, you know, the same thing goes for them coming through college. The colleges aren't set up to teach them these kinds of skills. So I'm not here, and I appreciate your comment, making a big pitch for my book about you know, college students. Although my interns, you know, and others have read it, and it's nice to hear the good feedback, and I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I just think it's important. I mean, as you were talking about before, that things have fallen by the wayside regarding grants for internship. And one of the things that I'm speaking about a lot personally to leaders is when COVID kicked in, and I said, "You need me more than ever." And they were like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Because the humanity side of leadership is going to be more needed than ever, and it's going to be the first thing you're going to dismiss, and
Right.
it's going to be the most important thing." And so it's this same thing as this connection back to, hold on, where's the humanity here? And I really appreciate you bringing up your own uh, trials and tribulations with depression.
Sure.
I've certainly been there. I understand that world very well for myself personally, as well as studying it.
Sure.
It's very easy to be dismissive of, even if you've had it, when you think, "Oh, I'm done. I'm good now." It's
Right.
very easy to be dismissive of it and say, "Well, just buck up, chaps," and that's just not how it goes. And I think it needs people like yourself who were very successful and doing well in the world to say to others, "Yeah, but it wasn't without having to battle this demon."
Right.
And it may not be a demon you'll slay, but it is a demon you can manage, right? And live with.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that as well, and I do think that's what's needed in order to you know, make it that much more in the open. But it is so much around no substitute for experience. I hardly think anyone, whether it's themselves or a family member or close friend, we're all touched by this, and whenever it's a taboo, is something else. But it is so important to keep front and center, and you know, we've all been through these many things, and I do want to remind, it is chapter one in the book around earned confidence, and just to rely on that, to remember that you can deal with things in real time and not get caught up in wasting your energy on uncertainties.
Yeah. So what was the I think that for all of us, there are moments. Um, and often the moments are not what everybody else thinks they are. So, people talk about that turning point moment in my life that people think about when I fell off the mountain in 1990. That wasn't the turning point. That was a point, but it wasn't the turning point.
Right.
What was the turning point in your journey, in your philosophy, even in your leadership, in the way that you approach business or leadership, or even life? What was the turning point for you? What was the catalyst there?
Well, actually, I think we've touched on them just slightly. You know, the initial one, if you asked me this a few years ago, would have been in 2002, becoming a single dad and stepping
Sure.
out on my own entrepreneurially, and having that all intertwined. I wouldn't change it for the world, in that regard. But more recently, ironically, it's with COVID coming about and sidelining the nonprofit. And the book came out late March. Like all of my launch parties, everything is went by the wayside. Um, but it's interesting, in terms of how it all unfolds around trusting your gut and swimming with the current. And
Mhm.
I did mention how difficult, as much as passionate as I am, the internship space has been, and I'm not done with it, trust me. But at the same time, I really feel like things have been going my way this past
Mhm.
year, and if it weren't for COVID, I would not have really picked my head up enough to realize I'm really enjoying doing these interviews. I really want to do a podcast. I'm ready to lean all in with what I'm doing now. And honestly, Dov, I've never been happier. So I'll go to the turning point of the one that matters most, which is right now.
That's interesting. And I definitely believe and speak about that the moment that is the greatest moment often looks like the worst moment. Looks like until you step off the edge of that cliff and then you realize, oh shit, I'm flying. This is pretty cool. But what it takes to step off that cliff is enormous. For most people, it's enormous, and I get it. So as we're coming towards the end of the show, Matt, I want to ask you a personal question
Sure.
that I'm sure, based on what you've just told me, you've considered probably fairly deeply. What is it that drives you? And by that I'm not saying give me some schlocky answer that I mean, like, what is it that really drives you? What is it that makes you go, I gotta get out of bed today, even though we all have days, right? So it's a
Yep.
terrible day. It's pissing down with rain. It's dark outside. Nothing went right for the last week, and on top of that, the wife thinks I'm a bit of a schmuck lately, and I've been a bit of a schmuck lately, and I've also eaten too many carbohydrates, and I'm feeling kind of knackered. On that day,
Right.
what gets you out of bed?
Well, for one, and I want to, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a substantive answer, which is I've always known myself to be a difference maker, right? So that's something I know as a core value has mattered to me, but it's more than that. I had I reunited with a mentor of mine from 30 years ago. I haven't spoken to him since. It's one of those individuals who, like a like a day went by, even though it was 30 years, and you
Sure.
pick up the conversation. And he said, Matt, with
30
the
years ago.
book,
So he mentored you when you were 6?
I I'll be 54 in a few months.
Damn, man, you look
So
good. Whatever cream you're using, send me some.
thank you. I'll give credit to my mom. She's a pretty lady. The fact that he said to me, so I've always remembered you as being relentlessly positive. And it was interesting, right? Because it's like I know I'm a positive person, but that's the impression I left on someone. And it allowed me to reconnect with, in a way, my younger self, to know that I had been this way. But I think what really is at the heart of the answer to your question is a sense of responsibility. I just feel as though some of the things that we've talked about already, particularly around the book and what I have to share, that what I've come through in life, that I do have things that are unique that I can bring in, and I feel a great sense of responsibility to do that even more and more, and have since established a goal to personally impact the at least 100 million people by 2025. I'm sure you would agree that it's better to have an objective of something of how much by when than to just say something flighty.
Yep,
So I feel the same way. I really don't. I really want to be clear about what I'm doing, and that's
that's
where I'm at.
fabulous.
Thank you.
Good for you, man. Thank you very much. As we come to the end of the show, there are a couple of things I want to ask you. The first I'm going to ask you is, what is something practical somebody can do? And the second is, where can people find out more about you? So let's go with the first one. Please tell us something, because I'm always my belief is that Information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. So what is something someone can do, preferably next 24, 48 hours, that will allow them to integrate a lot of what you've shared today?
Well, I'm going to go back to of everything we cover with internships. I'm going to go to the point that it comes down to the individual. And so if you are that individual, and just take a leap that you don't know what you don't know, to take an hour, you can do this in an hour, and step back and think about all the different work that you do, the different kinds of projects that you can break down, and really look at that inventory, not only of what you already do for which you can trade your time to have someone else do instead, but all the things that might be on the back burner, or ideas that you've had that you want to implement, and go all the way. See what that hopefully more than one sheet of paper says, because that is what's going to tell you whether or not it's worth it to you to move forward with having interns in one way, shape, or form. And I think that's, again, where everybody wins. And so that's, to the theme of our conversation, it does come down to that one-on-one relationship, and it begins with that individual who's the supervisor. So take that work inventory.
Thank you very much. That's great. Simple, powerful, and important. So, Matt, we'd love everybody to know more about you, where they can find out more about you and all your fabulous resources, and of course, your book. Please tell us where they can find out about all those things.
Thank you, Dov. Well, easy enough. It's mattzinman.com. So there are a number of free resources on there, including, Dov, about mood health, which is already very, very important to us. And there's a free video series there that also speaks to mood health and managing energy personally as an entrepreneur, and interpersonally, as we have here. So I just want to give as much as I can, and that's there. And the rest, podcast and otherwise, is easy to find at mattzinman.com. Thank you.
Right. So we'll make sure that all those links are posted. As you said, mattzinman.com. Matt has double T. Make sure that you put both in there. And you can also find out about the book with Z-isms.com. Z-isms.com. You can find it there. As I said, we'll also post all the links to Matt's social media throughout. Again, Matt, thank you very much for being with us. It's been a pleasure and honor. I hope you'll stay with us to the end.
Of course.
And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode that you've been listening to, or any past episodes inside of our LinkedIn and Facebook groups. Just go and find the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're likely working on only a fraction of your true capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in individuals and in companies. We want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you and your organization may be far more productive by investing in interns, by making a difference in the lives of those people who might just be piling the years into a debt program for their education, and instead you can give them a direct experience that feeds your pipeline and brings you the very best people. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.